Good morning.
Good morning.
Now, if I look like I'm about to doze off up here, you just yell at me or something. I woke up at 3:30. I think I was worried about that wintry mix that we never got or something. But, you know, it's bad when the pastor falls asleep during the sermon, so we'll try not to do that. I was just thinking, watching the praise team, I really enjoy listening when you practice beforehand. And I realize how much that's been personal worship time for me over the years, is listening to outside of the normal worship service. So I love hearing that. So I want to tell you guys that. But then there was a time, Jim Bitzer, he owned a real estate company in Shelbyville, and we would get together on an evening and we would put together the program for that week. I was just, the associate pastor there, and we would crank the music up. It was all canned, but we had some great worship times. So I think I'm sharing that partly because today is a little bit about worship, about Sabbath, essentially. And I wanted to start out with a passage from Isaiah 30. It's verse 15. It says, "This is what the sovereign Lord, the Holy One of Israel says, in repentance and rest is your salvation, in quietness and trust is your strength." And that kind of sums up a little bit of what the Sabbath is to be about. Salvation and strength come from repentance and rest. That's kind of, if you were to summarize that. And I again, actually stealing an idea from the book study that we've been doing, a group of pastors and I, on Tuesday. I don't know whether I should recommend it yet. I haven't got through it. It might go off the rails towards the end, but it's Beautiful Resistance. It's by John Tyson. Just in case you wonder what this is coming from. But in the chapter that we did this past week, he just talks about the constant busyness and activity of this world, and how that's often true of churches and Christians as well. We'd be just constantly busy. And I've been guilty of that. I can think of various times throughout my life, more so than others. When I was 16, I've shared this story. I totaled 2 cars within 10 months of each other. Rolled them, both of them, inverted, the whole thing. And, as a 16-year-old, kind of confronting my own mortality, and not necessarily doing it all that well, I just felt like, sleeping was life wasted. It was time wasted, right? So I swear my senior year, I didn't sleep more than 4 hours a night. I'd stay up till 1 a.m., get up at 5, go do, and manage to maintain that. Now at 50-some years old, I can't do that any longer. But that's oftentimes the way we approach life. And so in the book, I want to share the illustration. And it's the typical formula of a lot of these books. There's a story up front, and then they unpack it. But he talks about this guy named, I'm not going to get this right, Kame Shuji. He was a Japanese businessman in the 80s. And it talked about how early on in his career, he'd get up, he'd be in at work at 8:40, and he'd stay there till 5 and work straight through, Monday through Friday. And he was generating good business leads and doing well, but not in his mind well enough. So he changed his schedule, and he went from 6:50 until 10, 7 days a week. So essentially, there was no division between his work and home and any other part of his life. That's essentially all he did. And, you might think that, well, he was taking breaks throughout the day, but there were story after story of his drive and his work ethic. And they called him Kigyo Senshi. Again, probably pronounced that wrong, but it meant corporate warrior. And so he was this corporate warrior. And so then, the bubble burst with the Japanese markets, the Nikkei bubble burst, and he just upped his hours and his work ethic even more. And, there's a line in there that says he was just crushing it. And then the next line says, Shuji is dead. So the guy was at a seminar, and he collapsed and died at the age of 26. And so there's now a word in the Japanese language, karoshi, which means death by overwork. And so, reading this and then going on, it sort of makes this indictment of the church. It's on page 48. It says, "I often wonder whether this is why the church," and he's meaning, Big C church, throughout the West, lacks credibility in our world. Maybe it's not just big scandals or cultural failures. Maybe it's something much smaller, more common, more deadly. Maybe it's our exhaustion. And he points out a few things. He says sometimes we're just too tired to model agape love, to show love for people around us. As you know, when I'm driving and when I'm at Walmart, that is my struggle. Maybe we're too tired to show compassion, too distracted to pray, or just too much like those around us. And I thought that was a pretty serious indictment. And as I read through the chapter, I don't follow it a whole lot after that, but there were a number of things that it had to say to me. So I've got a quiz for you. It's a two-question quiz. When it comes to the Sabbath, whose day is it? The Lord's day. Yeah, it's God's day, right? Who is it made for? For us, absolutely. Well, I don't need to preach the rest of this. You got it. So but I'm going to do it anyhow. Mark 2, verse 27, it says, "And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath." So God knew we needed a Sabbath, and he gave us one. The other thing is, it is the Lord's day. It's God's day, and it is a reflection of who God is. Genesis 2, verse 3, "So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation." And I'm not going to read all the rest of it, but we know a few things about God and creation in that time period where he rested, right? He observed creation, and he had a few things to say about it. He said, "It is good." So if this is something that God does, and we're supposed to pattern that, sometimes we should maybe take time and observe creation around us and recognize where it is good. Maybe we should observe our creative activity. I did that yesterday, by the way. So I was at Lowe's earlier in the week, and somehow I decided, I've got to fix this light. We've got a pantry closet, and the house is built in 1918, so it's this odd space, next to in a cubby back by the fridge. It sits about yay high. There's a door, and then it's pretty deep. And 1918, so there's one single bulb up there and a pull chain, and of course that broke, And I had another one to replace it, but you got to get up there, wire it in. But while I was at Lowe's, I saw this other light. It's an LED light, and it had a sensor. I'm like, ooh, I like that. So I put it in yesterday. I'll tell you more about that later. But I got done. It turned out better than I could have imagined. And just periodically, I would just walk past and I would open the door to that pantry and watch the light come on. And it is good. Yeah. But sometimes we need to take a moment and observe what we've done throughout the week and decide, was it good? Maybe discern what is good out of our week, because not all of it's good, right? Our weeks sometimes are difficult. Consider your activity. Consider what you've done. Just evaluate it. Set your priorities. And you can ask yourself some questions too. Do you continue with what you've been doing? Do you continue with the things that chew up your week and chew up your time? Or do you redirect? And very often we get stuck in a rut and we end up doing things that aren't necessarily good. Maybe not bad, but they're not good. They're just not what God has for us. And we can ask ourselves, was our week, was the things we did, were they pleasing to God? And so that's part of what Sabbath is. It's taking time to reflect. It's also taking time for self-care. We said it's made for us as well. But have you ever felt burdened and burnt out? Yeah. And oftentimes we're not taking a Sabbath. We're not taking a rest. And even when you are, you can feel burdened and burnt out. But what happens is if you don't take rest, hopefully you don't end up like Shuji, right? But you can be grumpy. That's usually a clue for me. And I tell Ginger sometimes, I'll tell her, yeah, I kind of knew I needed to take a break. I was getting kind of grumpy. And apparently I keep that to myself better than I used to. She's like, oh, I didn't notice. But you can have other health issues, You can have worry. You can have anxiety. You can lose motivation. You can start phoning in the things that you do in your life. I learned that about myself, interestingly, on the military side of things, because you have this intense 2-week period during the summer where you train and you just go, oftentimes 16 hours a day. And you can take time, or you can get consumed by and I always found out that there was a time partway through where I'd have to lean over to my chaplain assistant and go, look, man, I'm going back to my tent. Or I'm going to go hide somewhere. You keep everybody off of me for a few hours, so that I can reset and so that I can engage their issues again, But those things happen. And we each have examples of that in our lives if we don't take the rest that God's given us. We're made for it. So the larger passage from Mark 2, one Sabbath he was going through the grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. And the Pharisees were saying to him, look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? And he said to them, have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry, he and those who were with him, how they entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar, the high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and also gave it to those who were with him. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. So that's Jesus himself telling us that the Sabbath is made for us. And he's also confronting something that the Pharisees are trying to do. They're trying to trap him in the laws. And he's making a point. It's not legalistic, So we sometimes, if you were to be legalistic about it, you have to be a certain place, a certain time every week, etc., etc. But look, if we had gotten that wintry mix today and some people couldn't come out because of the snow, God's okay because he wants you to worship again and again and again and doesn't want you in a ditch somewhere. Or, I talked about last week how there's so many idols in our lives, and sometimes people make a habit of not coming to church for various reasons. And I mentioned family can be an idol, but sometimes there's legitimate reasons where you have to do something for your family or with your family, and you might not make it on a Sabbath. But what's important is that you have time set aside for God. And part of that should be with God's people. It can also fill a need. Or you can also fill a need, rather, on the Sabbath. There's this, the rule that you weren't supposed to work on the Sabbath, and it was very strictly enforced. I'll get to a passage on that later. But, you can fulfill needs. They were plucking the grain heads, as they were walking through the fields. And you can fulfill a need on the Sabbath, especially if you're walking with God. Especially if God is with you and you're doing something for him. And you can enjoy good things. If they were hungry, were they enjoying the grain out of that field? I used to do that. I grew up, my grandparents lived in Kansas. My parents now live in Kansas. Wheat fields, more so than you see even now. And you get that during the summer, and it's crunchy, and but it's out of the field, and it's really enjoyable. We can enjoy good things on the Sabbath. We should approach it, though, with thanksgiving and recognize that all those good things come from God. We don't have to just observe them and say it's good. We can enjoy them. As a matter of fact, the rabbinic teachings really go into that as far as what the Sabbath is about. Enjoy the good things that God has given you. And of course, you can do good on the Sabbath. There was another instance where they were trying to catch Jesus out, and he asked specifically that, is it permissible to do good on the Sabbath? Because he'd done a healing. So perhaps there's an opportunity to help someone, and you take a time out of your allotted rest, and you can do those things. So it's not supposed to be legalistic. It is a time for self-care, but there's more to it than that. It's also for retuning. Is this world a mess? Has anybody noticed? Okay, maybe. And the point that's often made is we can become distorted by the world. We can become too much like the world very easily, especially when you're wrapped up in it day to day, And we're told not to be like this world. We can get caught up in the world's messages. We can get caught up in the world's priorities. We can get caught up in that rhythm of life that we've said is pretty frantic, pretty frenetic. We can get caught up in the world's worries and the world's affections, the things that it loves, even its affectations, the way we present ourselves. We can present ourselves the way other people do in the world and think it's okay, and sometimes it's not. I was thinking about this. The news is constantly selling tragedy and crisis. Look, the world was supposed to end since probably before I was born, and it was supposed to have ended multiple times since. But it's sold to you every day, and it will be sold to you every day, day in and day out, for the foreseeable future. I guarantee you this. So we need to retune. We absorb this throughout our week. Or we can become our labor, like Shuji did. There's a warning in a passage where Jesus tells them, don't say, I will go do this, I will go to this city, and I will earn for this amount of time. And he tells them, don't do that, because you don't know the number of your days. We have no idea what time we really have left. And we can devote all of our time to going and doing all these other things and not devote time to the God that we need to devote time to. God knows the number of your days. It's an invitation for us to kind of step out of time the way we see it. That's what the Sabbath is. It can be a timeless moment, a timeless period in your life. And that's not to say work's bad. Absolutely not. Right? We have an example of a carpenter. I'm guessing Jesus worked throughout his life, right? We have examples of fishermen. Most of the disciples were fishermen, and there was nothing bad about what they did for a living. David was a shepherd. Paul was a tent maker. So there's actually nobility in work. We're created for it, as a matter of fact. When you look at the creation account, what were Adam and Eve supposed to do? They were supposed to tend the garden. They were supposed to work. So there's nobility in that, but more than being defined by what your work is, it's better to be a man or a woman of God first. So you can step out of time, and what you realize is the world doesn't stop just because you do. A lot of times we feel like the world's going to stop if we do. And I think being able to do that does two things for you. One of them is it builds humility. When I first learned that, whether it was as a chaplain or whether it was as a pastor, whether it was as a father, that sometimes if I took a moment, the world didn't stop. I wasn't essential to everything moving forward. It's a humbling moment. And it's pretty good to have that humility. And it's also encouraging. Because we often carry burdens. We're driving forward, and thinking the world rests on our shoulders. And it should be encouraging to know that it isn't. That we can indeed rest with God. Romans 12, verses 1 and 2 say, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. So he's saying, don't be conformed, be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Taking that time out. And transformation is often a result of the things that we repeat in our lives. Whether it's service or work that I mentioned and you repeat it time and time again, or whether it's periods of rest where you spend time with God. That's transformative. So there are multiple types of renewal that can come from the Sabbath when you think about it. We think of spiritual renewal, right? I say that almost every week. It reminds us of who we are, reminds us of who God is. But there's physical renewal as well, in just taking a break from your labor, from your work. And I told you about that little tight space that I had to put the light up in. What I didn't tell you is I tried to work overhead from a bench, and eventually I had to step up into it and basically do a wall sit and work above my head for about 20 minutes. Then went downstairs and flipped the breaker, and it didn't come on. So then I had to go back upstairs, and I had to undo everything that I had done, and I had to flip the wires because the house was built in 1918, and it's the cloth wires, and they weren't color-coded. And those old bulbs, they don't have to be the right polarity, but the new ones do. So I redid it, and this time I didn't fasten everything back up, and I went down and downstairs and flipped it, and it's on. Okay, and then I had to come back upstairs, crawl back up in there, and tighten everything back down. And I got to tell you, today I'm sore. Sabbath, any labor takes a toll on us, right? So Sabbath can be renewal physically as well as spiritually. How about emotionally? You ever get drained emotionally? Honestly, when I talked about the things where I'd tell my chaplain assistant, hey, keep everybody off me for like 4 hours. You can become drained emotionally during your week. And then you're not there and you're not available emotionally for people that need you. And you can become drained emotionally from being there for people who need you, but you need that break so you can do it again. So that's part of Sabbath. God can reset your emotions. When you've gone from glad that you could help somebody to a little bit resentful, God will reset your emotions on a Sabbath day and say, okay, now it's time to go do it again. He resets you intellectually. You start thinking about the wrong things, and I often joke with Ginger about, I'll be around other folks that have seminary degrees and things like that, and I'm like, sometimes we think we're smarter than we are. And we need to go back to the book, and we need to reset intellectually, get our minds right. And that's part of what the Sabbath's about. Resetting socially as well. You run around, and I don't know everybody, what your workplace or your family situation might be, but I'm pretty sure each one of us deals with some dysfunctional relationships somewhere in this world. And so the Sabbath can be about resetting socially as well, and recognizing, hey, that particular relationship isn't right. It's time to get it right. Or it's time not to bear that burden, or whatever it is God has to say to you. But all of that leads to discernment. That's what our passage tells us. Taking that time and being renewed leads to discernment and being able to see what God's will is. Retuning brings all of it back under God's headship. Brings it under His kingship. So I said habits are a big thing, right? Making a habit of being busy means you're going to be busy. Making a habit of taking Sabbath and connecting with God means you're going to connect with God. And another point that was made is, a season can become a lifestyle. And the example really came from this guy lived in New York, I think still lives in New York. And he talked about the number of people who'd say, well, I'm going to go there for a season, I'm going to make it big, and then I'm going to move upstate, have the house and the family and all those things. He said, invariably what would happen is people would move there and they'd work on Wall Street, and then that habit, because they were only going to be there for a year or 2 years, would become their lifestyle. And that's all they ever did with their life. They never got to that place where they had a family or did the other things that they were going to do. When we fall into bad habits and we fall out of the habit of Sabbath with God, there are destructive things that can come of it. There's this spiritual deformation that can happen when we don't spend time with God. It can change our values. We can value God, we can love God, and then we spend time away and we don't set time aside for Him, and we find that we really value more the things the world values. It can change our vision for our lives. It can build those idols, it can transform your identity, it can harm relationships. Hebrews 10, starting in verse 19 says, "Therefore, brothers, since we have confidence to enter the holy places by the blood of Jesus, by the new living way that He opened for us, through the curtain, that is, through His flesh. And since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us draw near with a true heart, full of assurance and faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from all evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for He who promised is faithful. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together as is the habit by some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near." He's telling us to build that habit of meeting together weekly, spending time with one another, taking Sabbath together. So you can think of Sabbath a lot of ways. You can think of Sabbath as meeting, you can think of Sabbath as physical rest, you can think of Sabbath as withdrawal, but fundamentally it is time set aside. It is set aside for God. And it's to contemplate, to enjoy, to reset, to renew. And all that's kind of counterculture, isn't it? But it's all about holiness. Exodus 20. I hope you recognize this verse. Verse 8. "Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. And on it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is with you within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in it, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." So He blessed it, first off, so remember that. That's where all these benefits come, these blessings come. But He made it holy. And that word holy just means set apart for God. That's what it means. You need to have time set apart for God. for rest, for renewal, for recuperation, to be reformed. So there's some convicting observations that this guy made. I've told you, Sunday's really kind of almost not my Sabbath because I'm up early and come in and, I'm doing this. And preaching is not a natural act. I mean, I'm actually kind of an introvert, so there's all that. So Monday is kind of my Sabbath. And one of the things that he pointed out is entertainment is not rest. Wait, watching 20, 15-minute YouTube videos is not rest? So that one was convicting. And maybe there's some things that are convicting for you as well, that you do as part of your Sabbath, but it really isn't Sabbath. Since Sabbath is not time to catch up on non-work projects. It's not just another day of the weekend, to put up that light. So putting up the light yesterday and a couple of the other things I did, not Sabbath. But I have to fight off guilt sometimes. I'll wake up on Monday and I'll think I've got this list of things I need to do. And I caught myself, it's probably a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. I'm like, if this is supposed to be my Sabbath, I shouldn't feel guilty about not doing this laundry list of things. Those are to do on another day. And I think all of us can become guilty of that as well. So it's counterculture because we're creating a culture that makes a habit of setting time apart for God, of making it holy, of taking a Sabbath. And it's a hard thing to do. It's not as easy as it sounds. But I want to close with a pattern. It comes from Jesus' ministry. It's 4 R's, if you were to want to write it down. And it struck me because sometimes I get them out of order. It says resist. So that first one is to resist the world's priorities for a set time. Step out of time for a little bit. Then rest. And make it true rest. Not, like I said, 20 YouTube videos or not just, whatever it happens to be. And remember, and it's something I tell us every Sunday, is we're here to remember who we are. We're here to remember who God is. And that's what struck me is you got to rest to remember. He had it in that order. And sometimes I was thinking, well, I need to remember to rest. Both work, right? But you got to rest first. And then revel. Take joy in what God has done. When you stop and you pause and you look out there and you see something, you say, it is good. And I caught Ginger today and she was looking at a video on her phone and, oh, that's the grandbaby. I looked at her and I nodded and she just grinned. Revel in the good things in your life. Enjoy them. Whether it's good food, time with family, whatever it is, you can revel in those things. So resist, rest, remember, and revel. Set it all aside for God and recognize it's His. So that's my encouragement for you today. And I'd like to pray over that. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you have set aside a day. We thank you that, Lord, we're able to come together and we're able to share in this life and this walk. We're able to share in this relationship with you, that we're able to set aside a time and make it holy. And Lord, help us to truly take a Sabbath. Help us to set aside the fullness of what you offer, the fullness of a day to remember you. Help us to make it a habit in our life. And Lord God, I pray that you renew us, that as we lean into you, as we turn those things over, heart, mind, spirit, work, all of it, that you make us new, that you help us to bring it under your headship and make it for your glory. We thank you, Lord. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.